He is the face of compassion, the icon of non-violence. But what happens when the 14th Dalai Lama is no more?
For over 600 years, the Dalai Lama has been chosen through signs, visions, and centuries-old Tibetan traditions. But now, the next one might be chosen by Beijing.
What happens when the world's calmest voice suddenly breaks in silence? He didn't shout, he didn't stumble, but in one quiet moment, the Dalai Lama revealed a depth of emotion the world had never seen before. A single tear, falling during a live broadcast, carried decades of unspoken weight. As millions watched, time seemed to freeze, not because of words, but because of what was felt.
The Dalai Lama marked his 90th birthday with supporters from around the world on Sunday, after earlier countering China's insistence that it will choose his successor.
This wasn't just emotion, it was a rare moment of truth, unfolding in stillness. He sat quietly, his hands resting on his lap, surrounded by cameras, lights, and silence. For a man who had always carried the weight of the world with grace, that day felt different. The Dalai Lama, a figure known for his calm, steady presence, suddenly appeared more human than ever before. His eyes were glassy, holding back something deeper than words could express. Then, in front of millions, a tear slid down his cheek. The world watched, stunned. It wasn't a breakdown. It was something far more sacred. A lifetime of silent struggle, spiritual duty, and unspoken emotion seemed to surface all at once. There were no loud declarations, no political statements. Just a pause, a breath, and the weight of decades resting in one quiet moment. Social media exploded within minutes. Headlines appeared around the globe. Some claimed he had resigned. Others simply replayed the clip, searching for hidden meaning in his expression. But the truth wasn't in the noise. It was in the stillness. That single tear held more truth than any speech ever could. The Dalai Lama, who had lived through exile, carried the hopes of a people, and preached peace to a restless world, had finally allowed the world to see what that burden truly looked like. Not through words, but through a single, silent tear. And in that sacred stillness, something unforgettable happened. The world stopped, listened, and felt his pain, not as a political figure, but as a deeply human soul.
Dalai Lamas, they were both the political and religious leader of the Tibetan people.
The tear that shocked millions. He sat there, still and silent as the world watched. One tear slipped down his cheek, slow, quiet, undeniable. And in that small moment, everything changed. The calm presence we'd always known seemed to carry a weight too heavy to hold. There were no words, just emotion, raw, human, real. Viewers held their breath. Social media lit up within seconds. Clips were shared. Reactions poured in. Some felt sorrow, others felt fear, but all felt something. The Dalai Lama, the symbol of peace, had just shown a side no one expected, and the world couldn't stop watching. Whispers of resignation spread. The moment the broadcast ended, whispers turned into waves. News outlets began reporting the unthinkable resignation. Social media headlines flashed, "Dalai Lama steps down." But no one had heard him say those exact words. It didn't matter. The image of him crying was enough to spark panic. People across the globe tried to piece together what he meant. Was it his silence, his tears, his heavy expression? Confusion spreads faster than facts. For many, the moment felt like a goodbye. For others, it felt like a warning. The world was desperate for clarity, but all it had was emotion and uncertainty. Storm of reactions and rumors. As the emotional footage continued to spread, the world became consumed by speculation. The Dalai Lama's silence, his tears, his pause, each second of that broadcast was replayed, slowed down, and analyzed. Commentators tried to decode his expression. Religious scholars were invited on air. Was this the moment he let go? Some said yes, others urged calm, claiming he had only shown a human reaction, not a resignation. But the internet doesn't wait for confirmation. Screens were filled with bold headlines, thumbnails of the Dalai Lama with teary eyes, and captions like "Final Goodbye" or "He's Done." Panic began to rise, especially among his followers across Tibet, India, and the West.
At 90, the Dalai Lama remains a symbol of peace and resilience for millions of people worldwide. Tenzin Gyatso is the 14th Dalai Lama and has been living in exile in India.
People were afraid that the world was witnessing the end of an era. Temples filled with emotional crowds, monks gathered in prayer. For the first time in decades, the spiritual community felt uncertain. Videos of the moment flooded platforms, each one adding more intensity. People didn't know what to believe, but they felt something real had happened. And that feeling was enough to stir the world. Behind the screens, a quiet ache grew louder. The Dalai Lama had not issued a statement yet, but his image eyes filled with sorrow spoke more than words. It was no longer just about what he said. It had become about what he felt. And in that deep, wordless space, a storm had begun that no one could stop, searching for the truth. While the world reacted with emotion, some turned their focus toward clarity. What exactly had the Dalai Lama said during the broadcast? The official recording was reviewed word by word, frame by frame. And slowly, the truth began to surface. He hadn't used the word resign. There was no direct announcement. But there was something heavy in his message, something about transition, about letting go, about peace with change. It wasn't a resignation in the political sense, but perhaps a spiritual shift. His words spoke of impermanence, of passing time, of accepting what is beyond control. To his followers, these were familiar teachings. But wrapped in tears and silence, the meaning felt different. Some believed he was preparing the world for the inevitable. Others thought it was a moment of deep emotional reflection, not a declaration. Religious advisors stepped forward to calm the storm, explaining that while the Dalai Lama was visibly moved, he had not stepped away from his duties. Still, the line between emotion and message had blurred. The image of a weeping Dalai Lama had touched something deeper than headlines could explain. People didn't just want facts, they needed comfort. And the world was still watching, waiting for words that might bring peace to the confusion. In the middle of noise and rumors, the truth remained gentle, quiet, and layered. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how it had made millions feel. A message misunderstood. In a world hungry for quick answers, emotions often get mistaken for announcements. That day, the Dalai Lama didn't raise his voice or make any formal declarations. He simply spoke from the heart. But because his message came wrapped in tears and silence, it left space for assumptions to grow. The words he used were thoughtful, filled with the same teachings he had shared for decades.
A tradition where revered teachers like the Dalai Lama are believed to return again and again to guide the world.
Compassion, detachment, and the cycle of life. But this time they landed differently. The pain on his face, the pauses in his voice, the quiet moments between his sentences, they felt final. And so, many people heard something that wasn't directly said. News anchors highlighted single phrases, taking them out of context. Bloggers wrote entire articles based on emotional clips. And while some urged the world to listen more carefully, the noise had already taken over. In truth, the Dalai Lama's message wasn't about resignation. It was about release, letting go of fear, letting go of holding on too tightly. His tears weren't a sign of weakness. They were a reflection of his deep connection to humanity and the suffering it carries. Misunderstandings spread because people weren't just reacting to his words, they were reacting to his vulnerability. For someone who had always carried the world's pain so gently, this moment of visible emotion opened a flood of meaning. It reminded everyone that even the most peaceful souls can feel overwhelmed. And in that space, people saw not just a leader, but a human being, the weight he's carried for decades. For more than 6 decades, the the Dalai Lama has carried the hopes of a people without a homeland.
The Dalai Lama has led the Tibetan community in exile for more than 6 decades.
Since his exile from Tibet in 1959, he has been the voice of nonviolence, wisdom, and spiritual strength for millions. But that role has come with a silent burden, one that few truly understand. Behind every public smile, there has been pain. Behind every message of peace, there has been a struggle to stay hopeful in a world that often resists change. As years passed, the pressure never eased. He has spoken for the oppressed, guided the lost, and comforted the broken. And all along, he remained calm. But time does not stop for even the strongest souls. Now in his late 80s, his body is aging, and his energy is not the same. Yet expectations remain high. People look to him not only for guidance, but for answers, healing, and strength. That kind of emotional weight can slowly grow heavier with each passing year. So, when the world saw him cry, it wasn't just a moment, it was the release of a lifetime's worth of silent pain. The Dalai Lama is not just a symbol of peace. He is a man who has lived through exile, loss, and endless responsibility. And perhaps, in that moment on live TV, the world finally saw all of it. Not as weakness, but as the heart of a man who has carried too much for too long without ever asking for anything in return. The people felt it too. As the video of the Dalai Lama's emotional moment reached every corner of the globe, something stirred in the hearts of his followers. In Tibet, in India, in Europe, and the West, millions watched the footage again and again. Some cried, some sat in silence. For many, it felt like a personal loss, as if a father figure had broken down after holding it all together for so long. Temples filled with quiet chants. Prayers were whispered with trembling voices. In villages and cities alike, people lit candles, gathered in groups, and tried to make sense of what they had seen. There was no official announcement, no explanation, but the emotion was enough. It didn't matter what he said anymore. People responded to what they felt. His tears had created a spiritual ripple, a wave that reached beyond words, crossing cultures, languages, and beliefs. Even those who were not Buddhist, those who had only heard his name in passing, were moved. The image of his pain made people pause. It reminded them of their own grief, their own silent battles. In that single moment, humanity was united not by doctrine or ritual, but by emotion. And perhaps that's what made it so powerful. For decades, the Dalai Lama had been a guiding light.
The Dalai Lama is the highest spiritual leader in Tibetan Buddhism and believed to be a compassion incarnate, reborn over centuries to guide and protect the Tibetan people.
Now, in his vulnerability, he had become something even greater, a reflection of the world's quiet ache and proof that even the wisest among us still carry wounds we rarely see. A turning point for Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama's tearful moment didn't just affect people emotionally, it shook the core of Tibetan Buddhism. For many, he is more than a spiritual leader. He is the living symbol of the faith itself. Generations have grown up hearing his teachings, watching him smile through decades of exile, and trusting in his quiet strength. So when he showed pain, it echoed deeply within the foundations of the religion. Across monasteries and spiritual centers, monks gathered in silence. Discussions began quietly, with respect, but also concern. What does this moment mean for the future? Though no formal announcement had been made, the feeling was undeniable. Change is coming, not just because of age or time, but because something had shifted in the heart of the tradition itself. The spiritual world, always steady, now felt uncertain. Without clear answers, people looked inward. They returned to his teachings on suffering, detachment, and the impermanence of all things. And in doing so, many began to understand that perhaps this was not the end of something, but the beginning of something new. Tibetan Buddhism has survived generations of hardship, exile, and suppression. Yet it continues, not because of one man, but because of the values he represents. The Dalai Lama's moment of emotion may have been a breaking point, but it was also a reminder. Even as leaders change, the light they carry can continue in others. The path is not ending, it is evolving. The search for a successor. As emotions settled and deeper conversations began, one reality stood quietly in the background: the question of succession. For years, the Dalai Lama has spoken openly about the future and the idea that someone else will eventually carry his spiritual responsibilities.
The Dalai Lama has confirmed the institution will continue and his successor will be chosen as per tradition.
But passing that torch is not simple. In Tibetan Buddhism, the process of finding the next Dalai Lama is deeply spiritual, complex, and filled with history. It involves sacred rituals, visions, and signs. Traditionally, it is believed that the Dalai Lama reincarnates, and the next leader is a child born with a spirit continuation. But today, that process faces many challenges. Political interference, especially from China, has made succession not just a spiritual issue, but a global one. The Dalai Lama himself has said he might be the last in his line, or that the next leader might be chosen in a new way. His tearful moment reminded the world that time is moving forward. No one lives forever, not even the most peaceful souls. That truth brings urgency. Spiritual leaders and scholars have begun speaking more seriously about preparing for the transition and how to preserve his teachings, protect his legacy, and ensure that Tibetan Buddhism remains strong beyond his lifetime. While his presence still brings comfort, the world knows a new chapter is coming. And when it arrives, it must be built not on fear or loss, but on the strength of everything he has spent his life creating. What the Dalai Lama truly wants. Through every speech, teaching, and quiet moment, one message has always remained at the heart of the Dalai Lama's journey of peace. Not just peace in the world, but peace within. For decades, he has urged people to release anger, detach from desire, and live with compassion. That emotional moment on live TV didn't take away from his strength, it revealed the depth of it. And behind those tears was not a man defeated, but a man who had given everything and still asked for nothing. The Dalai Lama has never been one to hold tightly to power or title. In fact, he has long distanced himself from political roles, shifting focus to inner change, human kindness, and spiritual growth. He has often said that the world needs more love, not more leaders. And now, perhaps more than ever, those words ring louder. What he truly wants is not attention or recognition. He wants the world to understand that even a leader must let go, even wisdom must breathe. His example is not just in what he says, but in how he lives, quietly, kindly, without attachment. His recent tears, though rare, spoke volumes. They weren't a sign of giving up. They were a reflection of deep surrender, a release of weight carried silently for decades. A global response of love and support. The world didn't stay silent for long. As the emotional clip of the Dalai Lama's tears continued to circulate, messages of love, support, and gratitude began pouring in from every corner of the globe. World leaders expressed respect. Spiritual communities sent prayers. Everyday people shared personal stories of how his teachings had changed their lives. Social media transformed into a wave of compassion. Artists created tributes. Monks lit candles in his honor. Even those who had never followed Tibetan Buddhism felt something shift. Because this wasn't just about religion, it was about humanity. The Dalai Lama's vulnerability reminded people of something we all forget, that even the strongest souls can carry silent pain. Celebrities, writers, politicians, and spiritual leaders posted their thoughts, not just about the moment, but about what he meant to the world. They remembered the man who smiled through exile, who spoke of peace during war, and who never once asked for power, only understanding. In classrooms, his quotes were written on boards. In homes, his books were reopened and reread. A global voice had trembled, And the world had listened not with noise, but with heart. In a time filled with division and noise, this moment brought stillness. And in that stillness, people remembered the core of his message: compassion, humility, and love without conditions. His tears had become a mirror, showing the world not weakness, but deep, beautiful truth. The road ahead. With the emotional moment still fresh in people's minds, attention slowly turned toward what lies ahead. Change had already begun, even if no official announcement had been made. Spiritual leaders, monks, and global followers started preparing for what the future of Tibetan Buddhism might look like. Not out of panic, but out of deep respect. They understood that transitions are a natural part of life. The Dalai Lama has always taught that nothing stays the same forever. His life has been one of service, of teaching people to accept both joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. Now, the world stands at the edge of one such transition. Plans are quietly being discussed on how to continue his teachings, how to preserve his wisdom, and how to guide the next generation without his daily presence. For some, it's painful. For others, it's an opportunity to live out what he stood for. The path ahead may not be fully clear, but it is filled with purpose. People are revisiting his words, sharing his values with children, and honoring his legacy through action. The Dalai Lama may still be here, but the world is already beginning to carry his light forward. It's not about replacing him, it's about continuing what he started. Through kindness, through service, through inner peace. The road ahead is not an end. It is a quiet continuation of a life that has always pointed toward love. A legacy written in silence. Some legacies are built through speeches and grand events, but the Dalai Lama's legacy has always been different. It lives in the quiet moments, the small teachings, and the silence between his words. For decades, he has spoken not to impress, but to awaken hearts. And now, as the world reflects on that emotional moment, it becomes clear that his legacy was never just about what he said. It was about how he made people feel. The strength of his message came from humility. The power of his presence came from simplicity. And the depth of his wisdom came from his silence. In those few minutes of live broadcast, he gave the world one final gift: a chance to see the human behind the title. A spiritual leader who had carried the world's sorrow without complaint. A man whose eyes had seen exile, injustice, and deep suffering, yet still chose to forgive. The tears he shed were not just his own. They belonged to every person who had ever suffered in silence, every soul searching for peace. And in showing that emotion, he connected the world in a way no speech ever could. His voice may grow softer with time, but his legacy will echo for generations. It will not be remembered through fame or force, but through the gentle ripples he created in hearts across the world. That is the kind of legacy no headline can write and no moment can erase. Moment that will be remembered forever. History is full of turning points, some loud, others quiet. The day the Dalai Lama cried on live television wasn't marked by announcements or declarations. It was marked by feeling. It was a moment when the world stopped to witness not a leader stepping down, but a man showing his soul. No speeches, no statements, just truth, unfiltered and human. That single moment will be remembered not because of what it confirmed, but because of what it revealed. It reminded millions that behind every wise word is a person who carries more than we know. For decades, the Dalai Lama has been the voice of compassion, the face of nonviolence, and the heart of a people in exile. But in that emotional silence, he became something even more. He became all of us. A symbol of strength learning to let go. A soul tired, but still peaceful. His legacy doesn't end with that moment, it deepens. Because now, the world has seen that peace isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to carry it with grace. The Dalai Lama may someday step away from public life, but what he gave the world will never fade. His teachings, his humility, His presence, they live on in the hearts he touched. And long after the headlines disappear, people will remember the day he cried, not as the end of a chapter, but as a powerful reminder of what it truly means to be human. He didn't ask for praise, he offered presence. In one tear, he shared what words never could. His silence spoke louder than any speech ever would. And though time may one day dim his voice, the peace he gave will echo forever. Because true leaders don't just lead, they leave their light behind.